Well, let's begin then by looking globally at what's happening at the moment economically. Can you begin by just telling me a little bit about what impact we're seeing globally in the markets at the moment? What's happening in the markets?
Okay, I think when we talk about the markets in general, I think we are now really in a phase of high uncertainty. But to be fair, I think what happened now in Japan is a real tragedy. That's crystal clear. But away from that, it was also not a risk-free world at the capital markets over the last week. So we should not forget, we also have the Middle East tensions. We also had the inflation fears and the fears from an interest rate hike cycle. So many risks already hovered around. And now, of course, the Japanese tragedy is a catalyst for the situation at the capital markets with a spike of risk aversion now. That's clear.
Let's look a little bit more at Japan, because what we're seeing at the moment is obviously a lot of volatility, but it's too early, is it, to work out what kind of impact this is going to have longer term on Japan's economy?
Yes, absolutely. I think for the time being, also here, in particular in Japan, we are in a phase of high uncertainty, full of question marks, in particular what happens now with the nuclear level. I think what's crystal clear is that after that earthquake impact, now it's highly probable that after a phase of gross disruption and the destroying of wealth, that this will be followed by a strong reacceleration of growth later on. That's crystal clear. But all now depends on the situation regarding the nuclear level.
Indeed. Now, we've seen the Nikkei stock average volatility index more than triple this month. What does that say at the moment about investor sentiment? Is it just that it's that the situation is too volatile to make a really good call at the moment?
Absolutely. It's too volatile, it's too uncertain. Our clear recommendation here is really to avoid panicking, to avoid panic selling. But on the other hand, it's also too early now to be keen and to step into the market. I think our recommendation is really stay calm for the time being, wait for more details. And then it could be the right strategy later on to step into the capital markets in general, step by step, and in particular into Japan.
Do you think that the Japanese stocks still look pretty pricey, even after the sell-off that we've seen since the natural disaster?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because even before, from a valuation standpoint, Japanese equities had been quite compelling. So this situation now further improved, and we think that that strong reacceleration I just referred to, in combination to the valuation case, and also our assumption that not from a short-term perspective, but from a medium-term perspective, a moderate devaluation of the yen, a moderate weakening of the yen, definitely delivers many aspects for being quite or pretty constructive on Japanese equities. But as I said, not yet, but later on with a high confidence.
Now, you mentioned the yen there. What do you think of the Bank of Japan's actions so far, and what are your predictions for the Japanese currency?
Yeah, we are pretty much convinced that now, of course, the Bank of Japan has no alternative instead of easing their policy further. That's crystal clear, and this will be, I think, a highly probable outcome, or even a confirmed outcome out of that tragedy in Japan. On the other hand, what we should also take into account is that there will be a topic called repatriation, because the Japanese economy now, of course, needs money to start that rebuilding exercise. And this, of course, for the time being, can delay the phase of yen weakening, because when you need money and the flows will go back to the Japanese market, to the Japanese region, to the Japanese economy, this, of course, will cause further temporary strength of the currency. That means now it's a bit delayed, and this is highly consistent to what I just said regarding Japanese equities. I think it's still too early to buy, because the catalyst, a weakening yen, is now delayed given the repatriation story.
Now, when you were talking about it being too early to buy, when it comes to the right time for buying, isn't it going to be quite hard for investors? We've got a lot of factories that are shut, businesses that are damaged. So when you look at the valuations and the earnings estimates, how accurate are they going to be?
Yeah, that's definitely a fair point, and here we have to look definitely more into details. That's another argument which underpins our theory, rather to wait a bit longer instead of trying to catch the optimum point of time. This is in most cases not the most appropriate investment strategy. So again, very consistent to the statements I already made. Wait a bit more for clearness, for less uncertainty, for more details, and then we are pretty much convinced, based on our GDP expectation, based on the valuation case, based on our currency conviction, we think that we come closer and closer to a buying opportunity for the equities in general and for the Japanese markets in particular, but not yet, later on.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just before we go on, I'd like to ask you, we're a very fragile time globally, even before this natural disaster happened in Japan. Do you think that it has the power to derail this global recovery, or is it something that the markets overall are going to be able to get over and move on from?
We are still quite constructive regarding the global growth scenario. And here we should definitely take into account that the Japanese economy, the third largest economy in the world, counts for less than 10% of global GDP. Well, now in our worst case scenario, we perhaps have to deduct 1% of Japanese GDP for 2011. And then bring this together with less than 10% of global GDP. This means that roughly 0.1% we have to deduct from the global GDP estimation for 2011. That's quite minor, and so bringing everything together, we think that the global growth story is definitely intact despite that Japanese tragedy.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We really appreciate your views. Thank you.
You're welcome. Pleasure.